The war film is so much more than a genre. It is a multitude of genres. More often than not, they are categorized by era, their place in history. But it is much more instructive to explore the way filmmakers have depicted war, which story they tell, what they focus on, what style they choose, how realistic, and how the film in question expands our understanding of the nature of war and humanity. Of the many ways directors have used the war genre, I suppose the principal one is to depict famous events in history, to literally show us or interpret events. It's almost a way of giving us a history lesson, in a sense.
A war film it's a multitude of genres, isn't it, really? I mean, it's depicting an era in history, but at the same time, you're going to be taking little bits and pieces out of what happened in the war to make the film work, to give the film the drama, to focus on an aspect of that era, and to make something work within the dynamic of the screenplay.
The interesting thing for cinema makers is that the art of cinema evolves as the concept of global war begins, so that cinema and massive industrial scale war come to life at the same time. We start to see footage of war in reality, in newsreels, coming to our screens alongside films about the war. So there's this very curious initial relationship where filmmakers are beginning by effectively just explaining what it's like to be in a war. It's a documentary that's dramatized, given humanity, given color, given emotion.
There are those movies that depict a singular event within the larger context of war. These movies show how varied a war movie can be, from the heroic rescue mission of Dunkirk, to the destruction of the Ruhr dams in The Dam Busters, to the Battle of Britain in Angels 1-5.
Hello, filter room. I have a new track here, range of 45 miles, bearing 120.
They were showing these events to a generation that had largely lived through them. So their ability to take license with history was limited. So the films are pretty authentic. I mean, film, I think, can be really useful. I mean, there are some historical portrayals. I think the Battle of Britain is pretty accurate, actually. So I think that that sort of credibility makes it valuable to be consumed as history, but all films have to come with a health warning.
Angels 1-5 is, if you like, it's the anti-Top Gun movie. It's the idea that the Battle of Britain was fought by teams, it was fought by squadrons, it was fought by people looking after each other, not by flyboy heroes. We begin with a flyboy hero who prangs his plane and is then ostracized for part of the film as the heroes go up to that height, 1,500 meters, to where they begin to engage and put together, formation flying, very, very careful battle strategies. It's the acceptance of the individual into the group that's really the story there.
So obviously there are very famous films that depict very famous events, and what are your memories? Because I know your father is in Angels 1-5, which is about the Battle of Britain. So what are your memories and stories of the making of that film?
I think they tried to emphasize the camaraderie of the boys who were going up to take part in the Battle of Britain, and the ephemera of life really involved with of the lifespan of these people, and the fact that they could 1 minute be there and talking about what they would be doing when they'd be getting back from the mission, and the fact that many of them would not return. And my father was a kind of conduit for that, in the mess room, always jolly and giving them alcohol and helping them play their games and refresh the environment that they were in. But he, of course, is in the great scene where the glass of sherry has been left by one of the fighter pilots who doesn't come back, and my father then takes it off, because he's playing the steward, takes it off the clock that's on the mantelpiece and toasts them. and drinks it, and it's a very, very emotional scene, actually. It's quite an iconic moment in the film. And it makes it all the more poignant and all the more successful as a consequence.
On guard, leader! Okay, Foxy. Let me know when you're out of the flag. All okay behind?
So obviously, filmmakers are very interested in bringing to life specific events in war. We think of the Dam Busters, we think of the Battle of Britain in Angels 1-5, we think of the rescue mission of Dunkirk. There's a real cinematic quality to real life.
And those filmmakers were given the personal recollections, the personal experiences and the books by people who'd taken part in those particular battles. In certain cases, like the Dam Busters, in many ways, probably one of the most misremembered films. We tend to think of the stirring scenes of the raid and the phenomenal soundtrack. The vast majority of the film is given over to really the technical problems that were being solved and the internal disputes and ethical decisions of the scientists who were trying to work out whether they should be committing themselves to slaughter, in a way. So there's two separate films there. One is the heroic raid, and the other is the moral, ethical question about what's about to happen.
And when one reads, for example, about the character of Guy Gibson in real life, he was probably a slightly nastier person than Richard Todd portrays him as in the Dam Busters. But he had that determination and ruthlessness. You know, the only moment in the Dam Busters where Richard Todd shows any great emotion is when his dog is run over. And, you know, he comes back from the raid where I think 56 men have been killed, and says to Barnes Wallis, played by Michael Redgrave, well, if you'll forgive me, I've just got to go and write a few letters, as if it's just a bureaucratic matter. And that seems to be very much Gibson to the T. And you know, in Dunkirk, where you see ordinary men rounded up with their boats on the Thames to sail down to Kent and then sail across to pick up our soldiers, that's what happened. And when people watched that film in the late 1950s, most of them could remember, they may have been children at the time, but they could remember Dunkirk happening, and they knew that was what happened. They knew what is portrayed in the Dam Busters was what happened. There's no great license taken in either film.
The interesting thing about Ealing Studios' Dunkirk is that for a film of its time, even though we're talking, you know, over 10 years from the original events, it would have been well remembered by audiences who are watching it, and it isn't afraid to depict the ineptitude of some of the top brass in terms of fumbling in getting 330,000 British troops from this desperate beachhead in France. And it's a film that really does well at balancing the incredible chaos and desperation of that moment, and, you know, showing these men who are so desperate to survive, and then, you know, they finally get on a ship and the ship sinks, and, you know, there are all these kind of moments of horror within, but also in showing the kind of external perspective of those events, and showing what the Admiralty was doing, and showing the mistakes that were being made in terms of getting that evacuation moving. And so it strikes a balance between, I think, certain pessimism, but also a real admiration for the heroism of the plucky, everyday man.
The depiction of war on film has seen some of cinema's greatest directors produce their most innovative and powerful works. From wartime propaganda to profoundly anti-war statements and everything in between. Every aspect of warfare, from the home front to behind enemy lines, has been brought to the silver screen in remarkable ways.
Dunkirk was a great defeat and a great miracle. It proved, if it proved anything, that we were alone but undivided. No longer were there fighting men and civilians. There were only people. A nation had been made whole. Hooray! Halt!
want to get through before dark.
We want to get through, don't we?
The struggles and triumphs of the individual soldier, sailor or pilot make for great character-led drama. During World War II, this approach made the films more personal to the audience. They could see themselves or loved ones on screen. The perils of Dunkirk, the Saharan trials of ice-cold Alex, or the life of seamen in the cruel sea said so much more than many epics. On the home front, the small back room focuses on a troubled bomb disposal expert in London, while I Was Monty's Double tells the story of the man who spent his war deceiving the Germans into thinking he was the real Montgomery.
Finish?
Yes, have I done anything wrong anywhere?
No, that's just a formality for what comes next.
Thank you. You know, if I thought you were really a security risk, you wouldn't be here. I got quite a big file on you. I know where you went to school, who your friends are, what books you read, the lot. Oh, really? I suppose I owe you an apology. You see, I'm nothing to do with Army films. I'm an intelligence officer, and you've just been recruited. What is? A very big noise.
And there are certain films that take very sort of specific experiences of the war and try and portray them. I think of the bomb disposal expert in the small back room coming apart, the Paul Pressburger film. Or I Was Monty's Double, the very almost eccentric story of the guy who had to pretend to be Monty to make the Germans sort of attack him rather than the real man.
Yes. Well, of course, M.R. Clifton James, who played Monty's Double, was Monty's Double. He was reenacting, 14 or 15 years after it had happened, what he'd done during the war. And so one has to imagine that that's about as authentic as you can get in representing what went on.
In the case of I Was Monty's Double, we have a true story about an actor who looked a little bit like Montgomery, and who the British decided they would put basically in Gibraltar to persuade the Germans that they'd be coming up through the south, and deflected an entire regiment and 50,000 troops and panzers. So, but they play the comedy of effectively this rather louche, smoking, drinking, acting type who has to suddenly buckle down under uniform and have an imitation of this clean living genius general. So really they're playing this light comedy of the wrong man in the wrong job, rising to the occasion, of course, at the end. But we are playing that for laughs.
What I loved about that film was the kernel of it is finding Monty's Double on the variety stage, and then using that as an opportunity to create this alter ego for Montgomery. That's what's so genius about this era of filmmaking, is the small areas that you can focus on that are ultimately quite secretive, and yet, I mean, you can imagine everybody thinking, what could we make a film about? I know that was a fantastic period of the war and we achieved that, doing that, yes, and it'll be intriguing for the audience. But at the same time, it gives an audience a view of what was going on in the war at the time.
She was a flower-class corvette. Her name was Compass Rose.
Now, another way of approaching war on film is to look at the individual lives of those, the kind of the stories of those involved, be they army soldiers or sailors. You know, films like The Cruel Sea do a wonderful job of sort of portraying life on board. And I think that's important because you think of, certainly at the time during World War II, this was the only way you could have an understanding of what your loved ones were going through.
The Cruel Sea is a particularly interesting film because it's directed by Charles Friend, who was a second unit director to Alberto Cavalcante, who did Went the Day Well, and they were both very invested in sort of documentary-style realism. And part of that, of course, is depicting the psychological realism of what's happening for the crew members aboard this ship in The Cruel Sea, which I think is just a fantastic film as well, and maybe slightly underrated. But the sort of intrapersonal dynamics of the men on board. There are ethical disagreements with one another. One scene in particular comes to mind in The Cruel Sea, where you have Jack Hawkins, the captain of the ship, faced with an awful decision of whether they're going to sink a German U-boat with a depth charge when there are British sailors who are in the sea needing rescuing, and essentially they are going to have to sacrifice those men in order to get the U-boat. To see the individual cuts to close-ups of faces of the various crew members, and then one crew member shouting to Jack Hawkins, who's clearly already devastated, "You're a bloody murderer," is really striking because, again, not long after the war, 1953, and we're talking about showing the real ethical dilemmas of being on board a Navy ship.
I've been in on this with Stuart from the start. We had a fairly definite plan mapped out. If I could have his notes, I think I'd be all right.
Yes. But you see, I'm not worrying about you. I'm worrying about me. I'll let you do it. You go out there and blow yourself to blazes. What's your family going to say? Your boss. Heaven knows who.
No family. Professor Mayer knows all about it. And heaven can wait. I've got a list of things here I'd like.
The Small Back Room, I think, is an incredibly brilliant film, and it's a very modern film in its depiction of war, because in most of the rest of them, okay, you see in The Cruel Sea Jack Hawkins getting very drunk after he's had to drop a depth charge and blow all those men up in the sea. But normally it's about, mostly about heroism. People are just very straightforward, black and white. They get on with what they're doing and don't complain. And you've got Sammy, the bomb disposal expert, who's already had his bottom of his leg blown off, drinking himself silly and having a row with his girlfriend, who's very long-suffering, brilliantly played by Kathleen Byron. And you watch that film and you think, gosh, that really is a very realistic, credible experience, because you can't imagine a bomb disposal man just sitting down and doing the Times crossword when he got home in the evenings. It probably was the deep strain and stress of it. Of course you were going to start drinking. And really it's a film about alcohol. It's a film about using alcohol as a means to get through the horror of war.
What's this, a party?
No, just one for the road.
I thought the first part of the road was through a minefield. Is that the usual kind of training?
You know, the lady's right.
Bit cracking, Johnny.
And it's a particular sort of analysis of valour, isn't it? Of the ordinary man thrown out of his ordinary life in films like Dunkirk and it seemed like Ice Cold and Alex into an incredibly different environment, yet it's about remaining who they are and finding something else within them.
I think it's how they cope within that. That's the tasks they're set. Once again, the screenplay is so essential for that, to creating the jeopardy, but the tasks they've set, what pushes us through the narrative. And as you say, it's ordinary people faced with extraordinary situations. And I find that, but particularly Ice Cold in Alex, I mean, can you imagine yourself when you've been training and you're just sent out into the desert, and then you're having to deal with the desert and everything that goes on in the, completely out of any comfort zone, completely out of anything that they would have envisaged.
Ice Cold and Alex is probably one of my favorites. It's Wages of Fear, it's a thriller, and it's about survival as much as it's about victory or triumph or nationalism, but also it is a film about male camaraderie and about camaraderie in general. It's the sort of film that people might accuse war films of being in some ways, which is to say that it shows the adventure of the story. But it also shows something interesting about the geography of the war film, which is to say that, in these Libyan deserts, these people are fighting sort of for survival against nature as much as they are, the enemy.
Bombers!
Heading this way. Don't worry, we're not the target. They're off to the minefield.
Man, I don't believe there's a ready mine for miles.
Don't you?
During World War II, cinema was the most powerful medium available for communicating to the masses. keeping spirits high, warning people to be vigilant, charting the progress of the war, and stirring a general sense of patriotism. Controlled by the Ministry of Information, such films as 49th Parallel, The Big Blockade, and Went the Day Well are great examples of how cinema was used as an instrument of war itself in the form of propaganda. For those films made during World War II, you were almost required to be part of the war effort. You were propaganda, very necessary propaganda, which creates a style of film. You think of 49th Parallel, The Big Blockade, and the extraordinary Went the Day Well. That was 1942.
I mean, a lot of the propaganda films that we're talking about, particularly the Powell and Pressburger ones, have two audiences. One, the domestic, but the other, perhaps the most important, the American audience. At this point, British cinema is fighting on two fronts. It's building the morale at home, but it's also saying to the Americans, come into this war, democracy is at stake. The 49th Parallel is a very specific, very clever way to bring that threat home. So what we see is a German submarine wrecked off the coast of Canada, and the crew, some of the crew make it onshore, and they're heading down to the United States, at that point a neutral country where they hope to make their way to safety. Along the way, they come across, for instance, German immigrants to Canada, who they try to persuade that the Nazi mission is correct. And you see essentially the message from the British is, look, it doesn't matter if you're German in Canada or German in America. The point is, when you're a Democrat, and these people are Nazis. So there's this ferocious, fervent Nazi leader of the escaping submarine crew who's constantly trying to get the Nazi message across, and constantly losing men or having people turn coat on him or failing to persuade people. And it shows, if you like, the bankruptcy of the Nazi propaganda message, whilst at the same time saying, look, this could happen. You could get these people coming this far. There can be U-boats off the coast of the States.
So all of the scripts would be heavily screened by the War Office, so there was nothing anti-British involved, and yet telling the story and communicating the message that they felt should be delivered, and also how the public should behave, and it has to end in a positive way. Mm-hmm. There can't be a negative aspect at all involved with the propaganda film.
And something like the 49th Parallel by Powell and Pressburger is very specifically political. It's the message, the anti-Nazi message. We follow Eric Portman and his sort of dissolving U-boat crew as they escape their sinking sub and cross Canada.
Yes, I think the journey has to be made, doesn't it? And also, it's the very end of the film is absolutely unbelievably positive. Yes, we're right. Yes, this is the right thing to be doing. Yes, we are pursuing our aims. Our democratic aims are the ones that are the best in the world, and we need to fight for democracy, which obviously was and rid ourselves of this evil empire. This was the message in that film.
Granting your long war, then how soon will Germany begin to feel the pinch of blockade?
Oh, she began to feel the pinch years ago. Hitler was blockade-minded from the start. He feared its effect so much that he started rationing Germany as soon as he came into power.
Yes, I know. And she seems to bear up pretty well on a diet of guns minus butter.
The German war economy is like a steel and concrete building. Take a hell of a lot of knocks. You can't demolish it by smashing one girder or making a hole in one wall. But if you start digging at the foundations, well, then that's another matter. And that's what we're trying to do.
Mr. Taylor, we Americans don't know the first thing about how your blockade actually works.
Well, Mr. Reynolds, our first job is to put the German mercantile marine out of action. Many of their ships are in neutral ports this morning. Most of them will remain there till the end of the war, immobilized.
In the case of the Big Blockade, by this point you're getting to a film which is actually furious with America. It's almost anti-American to some degree, because it's kind of saying you really ought to be here. It's not saying please, it's saying why aren't you here? This film has a very curious double message. I mean, part of the problem is that the British myth at that time about itself was that we were isolated, that we were clinging on, that we were, there was the few, that these convoys were the lifeline. The Big Blockade presents the idea that the British had very successfully deployed an enormous economic machine which was damaging the German war economy. So you have a message which is saying, look, we're doing this. This is absolutely successful. We're destroying the German war economy. Why aren't you here? for what people watching at home, for whom a lot of the messages were, hang on everybody, this could go, we're on the verge of collapse. The film, which has comedians like Will Hay, basically giving very specific accounts of how convoys work or information about economic blockade strategies. It's a very unusual film for that, and it sits quite uneasily, I think, in the British film canon.
This was the way of keeping the country happy, of chivvying us all along, of sort of making patriotism, rise to the surface. And many studios, Ealing amongst them, were, driven by the mainstream information to make propaganda films. I think the 49th Parallel by Powell and Pressburger is very much a propaganda film. The Big Blockade, right through to something like Went the Day Well, which is very dramatic, which portrays what might happen if the Germans sort of infiltrated an English village.
When the Day Well is an exemplary propaganda film because what we knew by 1942, when that film came out, we knew about the bestiality of the Germans. There had been so many reports in the newspapers, either from refugees who'd fled Poland or the East, about how they took no prisoners, their use of torture, their use of indiscriminate killing. And when you see this transplanted into an English village in Buckinghamshire, it comes as rather a shock.
Stay where you are, children. Tom, study. Oh, keep away from the window. You stay with the children, Nora.
Come on, children. Let's get back.
When the Day Well has two moments in it, well, actually three moments in it, that are profoundly shocking still, and were profoundly shocking then. The execution of the vicar when he's trying to ring the bell, the postmistress stabbing in cold blood a man she realises is a German soldier, and the scene very near the end, which is really about spreading the message that we're all in this together, when the very grand lady of the manor, who's got refugee children in her house, sees a hand grenade come through the window. Without a moment's hesitation, she picks it up and runs outside and closes the door and is blown to smithereens off camera. But whereas the first two incidents say, look, these Germans are really nasty, they will do vile things and they have to be killed when you get your hands on them, that last scene really is about quality of sacrifice. Very clear message at the time, of course, written by Graham Greene, so there was no mucking around in terms of quality. But also now, watching that film 80 years later, you see just how effective it was, which is not always true about some of those propaganda films. Obviously, in the war, writers and directors had to understand the limits of what people could cope with without being demoralised. You couldn't have made The Cruel Sea, great film though it is, and shown it during the war, because it would have horrified people and thought, well, God, I'm not going to go and join the Navy and put up with that. And it would have demoralised the families of people who were in the Navy.
Often dubbed the War is Hell movie, filmmakers have stripped away the heroic artifice to show the reality of what it's like to be at war. These are often viewed as anti-war films, taking a revisionist approach long after the war in question is over and filmmakers were freed from the propagandist demands of the moment. There was a desire to use cinematic tools to place us into the theatre of war. There are such films as All Quiet on the Western Front and A Hill in Korea and Sam Peckinpah's hellish Cross of Iron. It's not just a case of how filmmakers portray war, often it's about what war offers filmmakers. This incredible variety of geography and imagery is just food and drink to a great director.
I think we see it again and again with trench warfare, with the First World War. There are these vast horizontal lines that provide this kind of visual geometry and this visual symmetry, and the sort of stretch of terror that is no man's land, the sight of fixed bayonets, the steel helmets. We can really conjure those images in our head from so many films, from Paths of Glory to the original All Quiet on the Western Front, which came out only a year after the classic novel that it was adapted from, which is I think quite something, because its turnaround on that adaptation is still so smart and so, I think, watchable today, and pretty faithful as an adaptation goes.
World War I is a notable war in that there were filmmakers operating immediately afterwards, but there wasn't the same tradition of war films that really sprung up after the Second World War, perhaps because the shell shock of the horror of that war was still reverberating around the continent. Of course, All Quiet on the Western Front is the most famous of this, partly because it's such an astonishingly well-made film, and because it has so much heart and sympathy, and it connects the experience of a kid who joins up and is then disillusioned with war in a way which all of that generation could identify with. If you'd served in the war, or you knew someone who served in the war, the All Quiet on the Western Front experience was not exclusively German. It was the experience of being a European soldier thrown into those trenches. And they are still at the stage where they're exploring what happened. So there's large parts of this film which could appear mundane, because it's about the daily life, it's trying to get food, it's how do you see your friend in hospital. But because of the use of sound, because of that constant awareness that bdeath is a second away, you can't watch that film and relax at any moment. You're always on the edge of your seat waiting for something catastrophic to happen. Brilliantly written, brilliantly directed, brilliantly acted.
Here, come on down.
I must say, Frank.
Now listen, I've been lost dozens of times. Sometimes alone, sometimes with other men, several times with the whole regiment, so I know this much. Either we separate here and now, and it's each man for himself, or we stick together, and somebody must command. Who's for separating?
What are you for yourself, George?
I'll put another question. Do we surrender, or do we try and get back home?
Oh, no, well, what do you think?
Right. Frank, you're navigator. Where are we?
There is a strident, highly suspenseful collection of war films that focus on the action of spies, resistance fighters, and missions behind enemy lines. Films closer to thrillers. Odette has Anna Neagle evading the Nazis in occupied France. Against the Wind has refugees returned to war-torn Belgium to destroy a records office. One of Our Aircraft is Missing portrays the struggles of a downed British bomber crew in occupied Holland. And another very particular genre within war is what I call the behind enemy lines stories. Odette is a famous example. Against the Wind. Something as unusual as The African Queen, which is obviously a romance with Hepburn and Bogart. But also it's a story about people going down a river to bomb a German gunship in World War I. So it is a behind enemy lines story. It's kind of a familiar genre. Went the Day Well is the opposite way around, but it's the Germans behind enemy lines, but it's still a very interesting sort of aspect of war film.
I think why that always works is because it's the secretive, the people, the audience aren't aware that these things took place, and so they're engaged from the very beginning. The whole idea of somebody being a spy, and the whole aspect of somebody being in the Odette film, for example, where she's taught how to behave, taught how to give secrets in an unbelievably dangerous environment, because of course if she gets caught she'll be tortured and shot. So the stakes are enormously high. So in a sense you're onto a winner.
But we badly need volunteers who know and love France, and who would, if needs be, lay down their lives for France.
It was in September 1942 that Odette Sansom, alias Madame Odette Métayer, number S23, known to us as Lise, completed her training. For her bravery and bearing when in the hands of the enemy, Odette was awarded the George Cross, the highest British honor that can be bestowed on any woman. This is her story.
Au revoir, Lise. Good luck.
Au revoir. Merci.
Behind Enemy Lines begins with a series of films which emerged from the British discovering that during the Second World War they deployed something called the Special Operations Executive, which was initially conceived of by Churchill but executed by a man called Maurice Buckmaster, which sent civilians who could speak French into France, or Dutch into the Netherlands, where they would carry out sabotage operations and form links with the local resistance movements. And Odette in particular is about a real woman, Odette Sampson. She consulted on the film, she survived. It's an incredibly realistic account of how the Special Operations Executive operated. One of our aircraft is missing, is, if you like, it's a propaganda film about which explains certain things to the British public. It explains how certain things in the war happened. And it's done from this position where they make a great valorification. They make the pilots of this plane heroes just by the way they shoot them. There are these marvellous uplit camera angles where you've got these men cramped inside a bomber but lit from below, looking like warriors and yet incredibly vulnerable, eventually crashing to the ground and trying to make their way across Holland back to the UK.
How are you, Father Elliot?
Very well.
This is Andrew. We've just been christening him.
I leave my name behind when I come to this country.
He's over on a short holiday from Belgium. Of course, you haven't the faintest idea of what we do here.
No, I haven't.
Well, it's sabotage.
Camouflaged explosives, trained men and women. This is the place where we get them.
We collect all kinds of queer fish in this organization. People who'd never be taken for saboteurs. Like you, Father.
But also they focus more on individual stories of struggle and often sacrifice, because so many spies died during the war. Often resistance members were killed. Your chances of survival were probably not great. And so these stories of more quiet everyday people who fought in the resistance, or people of remarkable courage and resilience working espionage, were things that would eventually come to light. But it just took a little longer to get there because, just the nature of the work.
Also, the great thing about those Behind Enemy Lines films, as you correctly call them, is they are a brilliant way of coming up close and personal with the Nazis and showing how really vile they were. And it's, again, why Went the Day Well in a different context works so well, because you're there with the Germans. In something like The Cruel Sea, you never really see the Germans. You see their weaponry coming and blowing the ship up, but that's about it. It's about relations between the people who are on the same side fighting this ghastly enemy.
Who is the senior? You, Hauptmann Tyler, have the longest been here. There's too much noise.
Oh, I'm sorry. We were laughing.
Ah, laughing. Oh, I see you have the British humor. Well, Englishmen will laugh at anything, but mostly they laugh at nothing. Here you will not laugh for long. Here you will remain until the war is won by Germany. There will be no escape unless you wish to die. Now you can laugh if you wish.
A staple of cinema, the Prisoners of War film combines a study of the community of men in POW camps and their varied attempts to escape. The Colditz story is surely the most famous example, but there are numerous takes on this fixture, including The Wooden Horse and Danger Within, which did The Great Escape years before The Great Escape. Jean Renoir's La Grande Illusion, regarded as one of the greatest films ever made, reveals the strange bond that forms between the prisoners and their German captor, Erich von Stroheim. One of the most distinctive genres within the category of war film is the prisoner of war film. And there's so much, so many variations on a theme. I think of La Grande Illusion from Jean Renoir, the Colditz story. It's a very rich category.
What I always find amusing about prisoner of war films is that nobody wants to be there. The prisoners don't want to be there, and the guards don't want to be there. The guards all feel they're second-rate soldiers. I mean, normally the commandants of these camps are elderly Wehrmacht officers in British prisoner of war films. But usually they are a great showcase for the British sense of humour and how our chaps got through it. I mean, that's particularly true in the Colditz story, and also in films like Albert R.N. and The Wooden Horse. They are very good at portraying British ingenuity, British resilience, and our ability to tell jokes, even when things are going badly wrong.
I mean, my father, in his first book, he wrote a book about being a prisoner of war, became a completely different person as a consequence of being involved in the war. He became the artful dodger. He said that he'd never ever envisaged that he would steal things, or obviously being depicted in film is people relate hugely to it, and as you say, will be having somebody then reliving what they went through, and I'm sure that their family would say, "I never realised you went through that," and it was a great sharing experience for everybody.
I suppose the thing about most war films is that they rely for their narrative force on showing how men, and it's usually men, in difficult situations, life-threatening situations of great privation, manage to rub along with each other, because there's always the instinct, I suppose, if you're in a situation like that you're going to turn ugly and start having fights with people who are around you, even if they're on the same side as you. And the war film effectively is a portrayal of the team effort.
Before I call on you to return to your own quarters, I have a piece of news for you, gentlemen. A postcard from two aunts of mine. I had intended to keep it until the morning, but now we find ourselves gathered together. This seems as good an opportunity as any to give it to you. Dearest Guy, we are both very well and enjoying the refreshing Swiss air. How we wish you could be with us. Your loving aunts, Gert and Daisy. They're perhaps better known to you as Pat Reed and Jimmy Winslow.